Mary, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for attending the session today. Certainly the goal of today's session is to walk you through an overview of Lockdown Browser. Adtalem has licensed Lockdown Browser for the individual schools and certainly for Chamberlain. So we'll touch briefly on what Lockdown Browser is initially, because Respondus Monitor is considered a companion application to the Lockdown Browser application. So it is important to have a little bit of a background on that application as well. So we'll get started. And then also, as Harry said, I will be stopping at the end of the session. Certainly, we'll open up the floor to any questions anyone on the team might have. I'm happy to assist in any way that I can. So the first thing you should know about Lockdown Browser is that it is a custom browser, and it is a browser that was engineered for testing when your students are testing online with your learning management system. It was originally developed roughly 15 years ago. It is an application that's ideal for proctor types of settings, and it does have a seamless integration with all the major learning management systems, or rather most in higher ed, that is. But certainly for our purposes today, it does have a very seamless integration with the Canvas LMS. Now, the focus for today's session will be on the Respondus Monitor application. Respondus Monitor, again, is a companion application to the Lockdown Browser. It cannot be used without Lockdown Browser. It does add webcam and video technology and takes advantage of the students' webcam and video technology while they're taking your assessment. It is a fully automated solution, and it does have automated flagging capability built into the application to make anything that the application captures simpler for the instructor when they're reviewing content. Also, it's an application that's truly ideal for non-proctored types of settings because it does extend the reach of what Lockdown Browser does in terms of blocking students from accessing other resources. And now it's adding that companion webcam technology, really more to add those ID verification components for the instructors.
Got up and walked off of the away from the table there, and what he did was see into the restroom. He didn't cut his mic off.
Oh no.
What we're going to do at this point,
and heard him in there
apologies,
peeing and flushing.
I'm going to mute the room so that we're not getting any feedback. But then certainly we can revisit any questions at the end. So in terms of the Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor, you should be aware that we have more than 1,000 institutions worldwide that are using Lockdown Browser. We get roughly over 30 million assessments a year with the application, and it really is the most trusted solution in terms of a locked browser solution in higher ed. Now, typically, when we're talking to institutions about Respondus Monitor, really, Monitor is an application that institutions are looking to find out more about because there becomes a question, or there is a question about maintaining exam integrity. In terms of accessing other resources, when you're taking an assessment remotely, there's certainly a concern about how students are taking that assessment if they have access to any type of resource, whether it be a digital resource that's on their desktop, or even the ability to maybe speak with a friend or call a friend or have others in the room. The goal when using both applications is truly to protect your exam content and to make sure that students aren't engaging in activities that you would consider to be cheating. Student identity certainly is a concern, so when we're having conversations with institutions about testing at home or testing from remote locations, that's certainly something that comes up all the time. It really is important that you're in a position to be able to confirm that the person who is taking your course, taking the assessment, truly is the person who's sitting for that assessment. Now, another topic that we talk about quite a bit is online classes. So sometimes there is this perception that from a student's perspective, they're not quite understanding why, if a class is an online class, why they might have to come to a bricks and mortar environment to take an assessment. So there's certainly that argument to be made from the student side. Also, when we're talking to different institutions, there's quite a bit of back and forth just in terms of on-campus testing centers. Sometimes just from a space perspective, it becomes increasingly more difficult to find room for students to take assessments in those proctor types of bricks and mortar environments. Third-party proctoring, that's certainly a topic that we discuss pretty frequently and in quite a bit of detail. From a proctoring perspective, proctoring, depending on the type of proctoring that you're looking to have provided, can become very, very expensive the more you're testing online. And certainly then there's a convenience issue that needs to be addressed. So in some cases, the faculty members are required to schedule assessments in advance, or students are required to find a proctor. So it becomes a little bit more difficult. Now, in terms of the lockdown browser application, I do want to start again with a general overview. It is an application that will prevent students from navigating to any type of area that will allow them to copy, print, or paste their content. They will not be able to capture screen content by using different applications. Typically, someone on the team from an IT perspective, or occasionally I get asked from a faculty member's perspective if they can use programs like Snagit, which allows them to copy or share content, and they are not allowed to use those types of applications. They will not be able to navigate to other websites, so students are prevented from navigating to uh, sites like Google or Wikipedia, if you will. So they won't be able to access that type of content, those types of sites. In terms of accessing other applications, students are prevented from opening up any other application, whether it be an instant messenger, a browser, or any other application. Now, typically, if your students are taking lockdown browser enabled assessment, once they open up their assessment, this is the view that they would see. So you can see here that the assessment opens up full screen. The menu bar itself in the top left-hand margin would be completely blocked, so they wouldn't be able to access anything, say, from their file edit menu bar that would allow them that copying, pasting, printing capability. They would not have access to a web address field, so they wouldn't be able to share the address of this assessment with any other student. The start menu itself would be completely stripped out, so the student wouldn't be able to access any other application from that area. There's no system tray. And also, all of their command keys, their keyboard shortcuts, even their right mouse click is completely disabled. So as you can see, Lockdown Browser in and of itself does a very nice job of securing that testing environment. Now, from an integration and installation perspective, if you are a faculty member that is already using the Lockdown Browser application, this becomes particularly important because there's only one integration component that's necessary when you're using Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor. What that translates into for you is that if your student's already using Lockdown Browser, there's no additional application that they need to install. It makes it very convenient for the student and very simple to work with. So from the student side, if you're thinking about how they're using the application, once a faculty member enables the use of both technologies, both Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor, it doesn't change anything for them. What they have access to on their side is directly in relationship to what the faculty member has enabled for that test. As an instructor, when you're working with the application, there's one dashboard in the course where you're adding all of your requirements. So it becomes a very simple process. All of your settings are applied in that dashboard, and then on the back end, all the video content is stored there as well. It is Windows compatible, Mac compatible, and there's also an iPad app that's available for use with the iPad. Now, just an overview of Respondus Monitor, and then I'm actually going to open up my instance of Canvas, and we're going to talk a little bit about the application itself, and I'll walk you through the feature functionality. Now, Respondus Monitor, again, builds on what Lockdown Browser already provides, and it adds that webcam component. It will record the student both audio and video taking their assessment. Instructors then also, once that assessment is completed, have access to reviewing the video and all the data, including all of the automated flagging capability of the suspicious behaviors. It is an application that was designed with privacy at the forefront, and as you'll see when we walk into the application, it is something that really ensures the integrity of the assessment itself and also the privacy of the student information. Very important to understand that when you're using this application, that there are no per exam fees. Our licenses are based on the seat model, which makes it very, very convenient for your students and also for your faculty, and it does drive that price down considerably. So in terms of using the application itself, the first thing I'm going to take you to is my instance of Canvas, and we'll talk a little bit about the faculty side and how I add my requirements. So I'm actually just logging in with my faculty level account. I'm going to navigate to a course that I have faculty rights to. So for me, it's Geography 101. Once the LTI has been enabled on the technical side, in the left-hand margin, you can see I have an option for the Lockdown Browser dashboard. Now, once this opens, you can see that there are three separate columns. There's a column for quizzes, a column for Lockdown Browser, and a column for Respondus Monitor. For those in the room that might have seen Lockdown Browser or used it already, very important to understand that the difference here for you would be that instead of just having two columns that you work with, one for quizzes and one for Lockdown Browser, we've now opened up the settings for Respondus Monitor, and you'll have access to a third column. So again, everything is done in that same dashboard. It's very, very simple to add all the requirements. If I was looking to add the requirements for both Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor, I'd simply click on the quiz or the context menu next to the quiz that I want to work with, select the option to modify my settings. My first step is to add the requirement for Lockdown Browser. And it is important to understand that the faculty member has complete control over whether or not they even have interest in using Lockdown Browser, then also if they want to add the functionality for Respondus Monitor. So it's something that can be applied on a case-by-case basis, depending on your need. So in this particular instance, you can see I'm adding the requirement for Lockdown Browser, and I have some really nice feature functionality I can add with it as well, and we'll talk briefly about this. My first setting, I can either lock Lockdown Browser, the student into the assessment with Lockdown Browser, or I can take advantage of what we refer to as early exit. I'd simply leave this box unchecked, and this allows the student to safely leave an assessment in case there's some type of emergency. If I leave this box unchecked, it would take the student 3 mouse clicks to get out of the assessment, and they would have to give me some information about why they're leaving the assessment. I'm actually going to leave this box unchecked so that I can show you what that looks like when I take an assessment from the student side. The next option allows students to take an exam with an iPad. And as you can see here, if I wanted to add this as a requirement and allow students that flexibility, I just simply check this box. This explain link takes me to a knowledge-based article that gives me some information about how to navigate to this dashboard and add the requirement. And then it also provides me with student-facing information, which talks about how students would go to the iTunes store to download the app, and also gives them more information about how that app works. The next option allows access to a specific external web domain. So if I wanted to link to an ebook, from an instructor perspective, this allows me to link to a domain URL. So this is really, really convenient if you're interested in allowing access to an ebook. You'd add that domain location here, and you'd also add it in the assessment. And then in effect, you're whitelisting that ebook so the student can use it. You can enable the use of a calculator here, either a standard or scientific calculator, and then also enable printing from the toolbar if that's necessary. Now, once I've added those Lockdown Browser requirements, I can just hit save and close. But if I'm planning to use those monitor webcam settings, very simple for me. I just continue along and add the requirements that I feel are necessary for this assessment. So as a faculty member, you have 2 excellent options when using Respondus Monitor. The first allows you to require Respondus Monitor across the board, meaning the student is now going to be adding that technology, that webcam technology. They're going to be recording themselves both audio and video, and then they're also going to be walking through those ID verification components before they start their assessment. This requirement means every student in the class will be using it. The either or option is also a really nice option to use, but regardless of the option I select, the very first thing you would see as a faculty member is this box. This box is completely customizable by the institution. My dialog box just talks a little bit about what Respondus Monitor is, how it's used, and then points to instructor resources. Then talks a little bit about questions about licensing. But if I elected to use the either or option, what this means is that you're allowing the student the option to decide what their preference is. Students can still come to the proctored lab, take an assessment, and use Lockdown Browser. But if they prefer, they can also use that webcam option at home. In this instance, the most important thing is to make sure that you provide the proctor in that lab with a password, and that's just entered here. And that way the machine in that room knows to turn off the requirement for Respondus Monitor. For my purposes today, I'm going to require it across the board, meaning every single student will be using Respondus Monitor at home. Now, the very first thing I do as a faculty member is I just walk through what I would refer to as my startup sequence. So I'm just going to decide at this point which pieces I want to add to my assessment and what pieces the student therefore would have to walk through before they start their assessment. You can see the webcam check is completely grayed out because students do have to have a working webcam. And then the remaining pieces are optional pieces that I can determine if I want the student to use. So if I want the student to take a photo, I check this box. If I want them to show an ID, I check this box, walk through an environment check, and then walk through additional instructions. Anything that has an edit text field next to it can be customized, either by the institution if you have a policy that you prefer to use for all faculty. So in this instance, it could be that every student must show a Chamberlain University ID. If that might not be available, perhaps that student's a distance learning student and they don't have a digital photo available. Could be that you're allowing them to use a library card or possibly a driver's license with sensitive information covered. The next option, the environment check, really talks about the do's and don'ts when the student's taking their assessment. So in this instance, I'm letting them know, please make sure the area around the computer is clear of papers, books, phones. Click start, slowly tilt pan your webcam so a brief video can be made of the area. Stop recording when finished. Now, in some instances, some of the institutions I work with might be using this application for certification types of testing. They may make it a requirement that the student needs to have an external webcam, and also placement of the camera might be important. Some institutions might require the student's hands and face are in the frame at all times. But that's something that, again, if you have a specific policy that you'd like to make sure that all the students adhere to, could be that you're pushing out one policy, locking it up at an administrative level so that every instructor is using the same policy. If you are customizing these fields and locking them up at an administrative level, it's even simpler for the faculty member to use. They're simply coming in and checking a couple of boxes, and they're not touching this content at all. The next option, additional instructions. This typically walks through testing etiquette or any instructions that the faculty member would like to provide to the student. In my instance, it talks about what not to access for resources. Don't access phones, tablets, notes, etc. Don't communicate with other people. Please stay in your seat, focus on the screen. I also give a little bit of information about what to do if there's any type of an interruption. Briefly explain what happened by speaking directly to your webcam, and remember you can't exit the exam till all questions are completed. And then I just click Save and Close. Click Save and Close for all of the requirements. And then you'll see that this Geography Quiz Week 2 now has the requirement for both Lockdown Browser and the webcam. And that under the column for Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor, both applications are showing up as required. Now, when I walk through this application, I talk quite a bit about all the feature functionality. I give an explanation of all the details and the settings. But in all likelihood, when a faculty member is coming into this application, they're adding the requirement for Lockdown Browser, possibly checking a box or two for the Lockdown Browser, deciding on which option to require monitor, and then walking through a couple of options here, perhaps. So typically, it doesn't take a faculty member more than maybe 45 seconds from the time that they decide that they want to use the application to set all their requirements and click Save and Close. So it's a fairly quick process to walk through. Now, once the students have taken their assessment, after it's been enabled on the faculty side, all that information is housed back in the same dashboard for the faculty member. So again, going back to that word one and the way we refer to this application, everything is neatly packaged. The integration is very tight and packaged into this one dashboard. So I do want to open up an assessment that's already been given and talk a little bit about what's available from the faculty side. Now you can see that this geography midterm unflagged has already been given. And as such, when I click on this context menu, I now have a video review option. The first thing that you'll notice when I open up this option is that this is pulling a roster for this course. It's providing me with the names of the students enrolled in the course, the date they completed their assessment, the duration of the assessment. It's pulling grades from the Grade Center, and then the remaining three columns are columns that are specific to the automated flagging capability for the application. All of these columns are sortable, and in many instances, a faculty member might come into this dashboard, and they may be looking for something specific. Maybe they're looking for grades. maybe they're looking for any inconsistency they might see here with the student record. Facial detection, flags, and total flag time. A faculty member might come in and maybe they're looking for any of the automated flags that might have been captured. So if they were to sort on flags, they could sort top to bottom, bottom to top. But in all likelihood, it could just very well be that I might be looking at one or two records just to get a little bit more information if I see something that makes me uncomfortable. Very important to understand that we did not build this application so that faculty could spend hours of time reviewing video content. It would be a complete waste of your time. We built the application really to give you some more accountability when your students are testing remotely. It's one more measure of security. And in fact, we recently had a co-presenter webinar that was delivered by one of our existing schools that uses the application. And that particular school had a really nice analogy that they used. They referred to monitor, Respondus monitor, as being very similar to a police car parked outside of a bank. That police car acts as a deterrent, really so that bank robber doesn't engage in that type of activity. And it's sort of that similar concept for a student. Understanding that they're subject to this type of review, it really is a very big deterrent for that student in terms of making that decision whether or not they would even attempt to cheat. So in terms of the application itself, when I'm in the dashboard, it could be that I'm just interested in looking at maybe one record or possibly two. So if I needed to take a closer look, I could click on this plus, and then this is going to open up that student record for me. You'll notice to the left that there are a number of thumbnails that are available. And the thumbnails are specific to the requirements that we set for this particular assessment. So if you recall, I required the student take a photo, that they show an ID, that they walk through an environment check, and the application does record both audio as well as video. The remainder of these thumbnails, the pre-exam thumbnail and the exam start, these thumbnails refer to the fact that there's no gap in the video or audio content between the time the student completes these screens and the time they start their assessment. So the student doesn't have an opportunity to pull out any information that you might consider to be contraband. Also, and we'll talk more about these thumbnails here, but I do want to make mention of the fact that the automated flagging capability, when you look underneath the large video box, there's an area titled Flag Segments and Warning. So I'd like to walk through the flags themselves. You'll notice the first flag is titled Missing, and this simply refers to the fact that the student is missing from the video frame during this segment. So if you're just interested in picking up a quick look at those flags, you can easily just click on any of the flag segments and warnings to take a closer look. Multiple refers to the fact that there's more than one person in the frame. Indifferent refers to the fact that it's a different person in the frame than the person who started the assessment. So from a faculty perspective, as you can see here, this is fairly innocent. So it could just be that some of the flags that become available to you, it might just be a matter of a little bit of context and allowing you an opportunity to take a look at anything that might have happened during that session, really to understand if it truly is a cheating situation or something that might be innocent. So you do have quite a bit of information available to you. In terms of the video content itself, you can see to the left that the videos themselves are broken up into random intervals. So from an instructor perspective, if I saw something in this video content that made me uncomfortable and I wanted to take a closer look at maybe perhaps more of that video, I could click on the exam start, watch the entire video, or maybe a thumbnail and just watch a piece of it. Now the videos themselves are stored for a period of 5 years, and certainly from an instructor perspective, one of the nicest things about the application for me is that, especially in a program where your students are enrolled and they might be seeing the same professors, or they might have a professor for anatomy, and then a couple of terms later, they might have a different professor for biology that might use the application. All of these videos will be available in the course and under the quizzes area. So within that course framework, if you give 5 assessments that require the use of both applications, you'd be able to go back and look at any of that video content for that student. Now, the way our application works, it does work on a seat model. So a seat model is defined as one student enrolled in one course with unlimited testing in that course. So it doesn't matter to Respondus if you have a student that takes 10 assessments with the application or one assessment. From your perspective as a faculty member, you'd have access to all of that video content for the length of that course, and it would be available to you really to come back and reference and take a look at. In some instances, some faculty, you might decide that you think that there's some type of an issue. You may want to go back, check a couple of semesters with another faculty member and see if there's anything that gives you a little bit of corroboration. So that type of information would be available on the administrative level and also for the faculty member. Now, at this point, I want to talk a little bit more about the applications. Now, from the student's perspective, it's important to understand that once the student is provided with a BYOD client, so it's basically a URL that's available and specific to your institution, once you provide that URL to the student and they install it, that BYOD URL, or student edition as we refer to it, Respondus pushes out those updates directly. So the student will be using that client that's sitting on their desktop, and they would also be taking advantage of using their own webcam. So the webcam itself, we don't mandate the type of webcam that the user needs to have. And webcams are fairly inexpensive, and most students do have access or have already purchased or are using a webcam. In my instance, when I walk through my webcam check, I use a Logitech HD. I think I bought it on Amazon 4 years ago. Still works perfectly, and I think it was about $20 when I bought it. Now, from the student's perspective, once the application is installed on their desktop, and we'll close a couple of screens and walk you through my instance. If they're running a Windows device, it's going to look just like this. It's an icon sitting on my desktop, looks just like a lock. They're simply going to click on that icon. And this is going to take me to my instance of Canvas. Now at this point, I'm going to log in with my student level account. And then my user interface will look a little bit different based on the fact that I've now logged in as a student. I'm going to select my course, navigate to my quizzes area, and I'm simply going to launch my assessment from here. So once I click on the assessment, and then typically also from a faculty perspective, your assessments will probably be set up for one attempt. We do this pretty frequently, so we set ours up for multiple attempts. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that the student is prompted with a terms of use screen. So the first part of this terms of use is between Respondus and the student, and then the next part is between the institution and the student. So this area is completely customizable by your institution. You can include a code of conduct here. You can include any type of content that your IT team might already use when students are testing online. But again, it's completely customizable. I have two webcams. I have an external and an internal. Hello, everyone. And at this point, I can record a 5-second video. I can record my audio as well as my video. And the student gets to check all of these screens, and it gives them an opportunity to make sure that everything is working properly before they start their assessment. They can take a photo. They can show an ID. They can walk through an environment check. So my personal preference is an external webcam. I think it gives a better webcam check. The student has an opportunity to watch their environment video as well, and really all of the pieces up until the point they click start. And in this instance, the student would, in all likelihood, just remove anything that's sitting on their desktop. So you can see that I had a couple of notes. I had a business card sitting on my desk. They can walk through additional instructions. And these are the instructions that the instructor provided that really tells them what not to access and what to do if there's an interruption. And then they start their assessment. Now, once the assessment loads, you'll notice that this looks almost identical to the assessment I showed you previously that was solely a lockdown browser assessment. Now, the only thing that's changed at this point is that Monitor has now an icon in the top right-hand corner that identifies that it's recording. And then also the student's webcam would likely be flashing green. So there's no picture-in-picture, there's no flashing lights, there's nothing distracting about this environment at all. And in fact, as I said, if your students have used Block, it looks almost identical and very, very simple for them to use. Again, as you'll notice, a couple here. From the faculty side, I should mention that we don't alter the way you set up your assessments. So certainly you can use different question types, randomization of questions, all the same LMS feature functionality that you're used to using with your assessments are still available to you now. You can embed images. And then once the student has completed their assessment, they just simply submit their quiz. There's a feedback form they can choose to use, or they could simply submit all their content. I do want to also walk the team through the Help Center. You'll notice that there's a Help Center button at the top left-hand corner, and Help Center just simply runs diagnostics for students. So if they're having any type of an issue when they're testing remotely, they can run webcam checks, system checks as well, just to make sure everything's working properly. If they do have any type of concern, they can always email any of this information to your IT desk for further review. But it certainly does lend some accountability because the system checks will really do a nice job with diagnostics on the student's machine. So in the instance where a student tells you that they lost their internet connection or something unusual happened, the system check is a great place to start, really invalidating any concern that they might have. Now, from the Respondus perspective, we do work pretty extensively with our universities and institutions. And the applications have been available at this point. Again, Lockdown Browser for almost 15 years and Monitor for about 6. So with the Lockdown Browser application and Monitor applications, we run training webinars regularly for faculty. On our website at respondus.com, you'll notice that under the webinar area, we always have a minimum of 2 webinars listed, but we usually run between 2 and 3 a month for the applications themselves. We have full resource areas that are built out for faculty and for students as well. So you'll notice with Monitor, there's a resource area. And we have quite a bit of training materials that are already available and pre-built for the applications, including getting started videos for both students and instructors, quick start guides that are LMS specific for students and instructors, and then also syllabus information. So this is rather nice as well. It makes it simple for faculty to get up and running quickly with the application. There are a lot of embedded links here, so links to short videos, quick start guides, areas where you can insert things like the URL for the institution, and then also additional information about our Help Center, and very nice testing etiquette for the student just to walk through to make sure that everything is done properly. So again, just to recap, Respondus Monitor is an application that really was engineered to help maintain the integrity of the exam process. It is an application that's very, very flexible because now you're allowing students to take their assessments when and where it's most convenient for them. It will also free up instructors from using any class time for teaching because we've had situations where faculty will actually tell us that around peak testing times, they're now allowing students to take assessments in their classroom environment, which makes it a little bit more difficult. And proctored space is becoming more difficult really just in terms of scheduling and availability. As I said previously, there are no per exam fees when you're using the application. There are two different ways to license this application. If you decide to use it beyond the 200 free seats that are available within your particular license, there's a licensing model that allows you to have a student purchase model, but then there's also an institution purchase model. Now, Respondus Monitor, it is a fully automated solution. In terms of the security portion of it, videos are only accessible by either the instructor who has the proper course credentials or the LMS administrator with the proper credentials to your instance. The videos themselves are stored through our cloud storage system on Amazon Web Services, and they are stored for 5 years. Now, I do want to open up the floor to any questions that anyone in the group might have. And if you can bear with me just one moment, we'll unmute everyone. Are there any questions I can answer for anyone on the team?
Anna, this is Helen Freeman. Can you hear me?
I can, Helen. How are you?
Good. Thank you for this presentation. I just have a quick question. In our course masters, we already have the lockdown browser integrated. We have it set. Will this override? I know you and I have had a discussion that I couldn't push out from the master the monitor settings, but will this override that lockdown browser? Will the faculty then have to go in and make sure that that's in place?
No. Once the Respondus Monitor or once the availability of Monitor is added, the instructor is just coming in and adding it to that assessment if they choose to add it, but it won't affect anything that's already there with Lockdown Browser.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anything else I can answer for anyone?
Thanks, Anna. I really appreciate you going into a lot of detail, kind of talking through the lockdown browser, which I'm sure many of the faculty on the call are have quite a bit of experience with. But it also, I'm sure it helps just to show the side by side where the integration of Respondus Monitor within Canvas is pretty seamless, and it's very intuitive, especially if they've already been using Lockdown Browser, because it's essentially just adding another column, and it's as simple as just checking those couple boxes and adding whatever functionality needs to be added for those specific quizzes or exams.
And certainly from the student side, I think if you have students that already use Lockdown Browser, the goal was to make it as simple as possible for those same students to take advantage of Monitor. So again, if they've already installed that client, there's nothing for the student that's additional for them to do outside of making sure that they have a webcam in order so that they can have access to the assessment. In terms of the applications themselves, they are rather seamless to use. I would encourage anyone on the team, if you have any follow-up questions, and I know that sometimes when we walk through a webinar, you can't quite wrap your mind around exactly what you might like to ask, but then when you're playing with the application, then certainly it's a little bit different. But I would encourage anyone to just email me at adesmond@respondus.com, and I'm certainly happy to answer any follow-up questions anyone might have. And Harry, certainly if I receive any emails, I'll make sure to copy you on anything I respond to as well.
Great, thank you, Anna.
Okay, you're very welcome. I'll follow up with you, and I'll certainly follow up and send out the link to the recording. I'll also send along links to those training materials. And then, as I said, if there's anything else you need, please do not hesitate to reach out.
Oh, thank you so much, Anna. And as soon as I get the recording from Anna, I'll go ahead and forward it to everyone on this call, as well as those individuals who are not able to make it. I'm sure they would benefit from kind of sitting through the walkthrough as well. And also, I'll go ahead and forward any, the training material, brochures, and whatnot. And if there's not any other questions, we'll go ahead and let Anna go and let the rest of the team get back to their day.
Is that you, Harry? Are you talking, Harry? This is Carla Sanderson.
Yeah, that was Harry.
Okay.
That was Harry.
I do have, one question. Harry, I think you're aware that we have also been considering a use of Respondus in student identity verification, which was covered a bit today on the call. If you applied that particular usage to what you're looking at, do you think that would work? I know I'm off the subject for a lot of people on the call, but it's a very important consideration for the university as a whole as we ensure that we have the students that are things, the people we think they are.
Right. So
was there something in the dashboard that you'd like me to show, or is there something I can cover that might help?
So I believe she was discussing more of the ID verification, just kind of, I guess a huge part of this is making sure the student that is taking the exam is actually the student, because, obviously with Respondus Monitor, an individual can just essentially log in, they can show their ID, and just take the exam, and no one would really know if that's the proper individual or not, unless if that the professor is actually going through, either knows what the student looks like or has like a photo on file of the student.
Actually, Harry, I'm talking not about necessarily isolated to the exam itself. We are required to do our very best to ensure that the student we're educating is the one that we think that he or she is. For all students enrolled in online classes, the majority of which do not test at all. So can this tool be used as a student identity verification tool outside of the testing environment?
No, so the Respondus Monitor application, and I'm sorry, Harry, you probably were about to jump in, but just from a Respondus perspective, Respondus Lockdown Browser and Monitor are tied to the assessment engine within the learning management system. So it's not a standalone application. It cannot be used outside of the framework of the assessment engine.
Okay, I think there might, are any of the others on the call where we were exploring using this for general identity verification? I may be stating things incorrectly. Anybody, Eric or anyone, able to speak to what we thought we might be able to do with Respondus for that purpose?
Well, no, yeah, this is Eric, and I was just going to say that one of the aspects is that it covers that because you are verifying the identity. I mean, it's just not every single person. And what a lot of institutions I've followed up with is even if they're not having testing in the course, they will still have within the orientation or, the welcome to the course kind of a thing, there will just be kind of a quiz or a testing environment where the student still logs in and they're still going through the process, showing their ID verification, and then it's just like, do you agree to all the policies, or it's just a survey, and then you're still being able to use this. You're using it through a testing, even though you may not have tests for the course. This is still just a survey or an introduction that they have to agree to and say, true or false, yes or no, and then they're still using this to verify their identity.
Right, and also to follow up on that, we do have some institutions that work with the application a little bit differently in this sense. And again, it is tied to the assessment engine, but some institutions will require a placement form of assessment for their student. So they may be using Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor with that placement test, and then also embedding content in both here. And if you can bear with me a minute, I'm happy to show it. But they may be embedding content that speaks to that ID verification component in the additional instructions here. Because if you look at the additional instructions, at this point, you could be telling the student that, please be aware that the ID you present, you're subject to whether it be an academic type of review, if there's any inconsistency. I've seen that done with placement tests. I've seen that done also with an introductory type of assessment. It's given, again, in the framework of an assessment, but it's more for that ID verification component.
Yeah.
Because bear in mind that the student would be walking through this screen here. They would have to accept this. This becomes part of their permanent record. But then also when they launch their assessment, the very first screen they see is that terms of use. So there could be language that you're also adding there that confirms that if there's some sort of a violation, they're subject to an academic or honor code type of review.
Okay. So Harry,
Carla, this is Helen. Sorry. Carla, this is Helen. I was just going to build on what Eric was going to say. In most all of the post-licensure courses now, at the very beginning of the course, or at least in FMP, we have an academic integrity attestation statement, which we are requiring the Lockdown Browser. That's going to be our test for students. Can they get everything downloaded and ready to go before they actually hit the exam? I think you could probably use something like that, Carla, at the very beginning when they log on to verify their identity.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to kind of talk about, is that we can always explore the opportunity of, you know, establishing like a 1 question, 2 question, like quiz essentially at the beginning of the session for where the student goes in, they can utilize the lockdown browser and monitor so that everything's being recorded, but then also just, you know, have some questions, you know, verifying the student's identity. But that'll give you know, the faculty the opportunity to run the lockdown browser, as well as monitor that entire first initial log on of the student.
And that question can truly be, are you who you say you are? I mean, it can even be, here's the policy, here is the expectation, here are the you know, ramifications if you're not, and are you who you say you are? And they say yes, and they've recorded that along with their ID.
Well, thank you, all three of you. I appreciate the input very much, and certainly want to figure out how doable that is for all of our online courses, considering the fact that we're growing pretty substantially with the March session when we bring all of the DeVry University's general education courses over to us. Do we need to follow up, Harry, or do you think this is sufficient to hit the go button on a plan like that?
I think we can still be on track to move forward. It's just in the next week or two, I think it'd be great if you know, you and I and whoever else you may feel would benefit from sitting in on this meeting to kind of discuss more about the ID verification part and see what we can do to kind of you know, get rolling on the start of January session. But I think from a Respondus monitor standpoint, I think we should be good to go.
Okay, great. Well, I'll do that, Harry. I'll get us together. Some of my team are going to be on vacation. It might, I guess we need to be meeting though in the next week or so, like you say. So I'll get something set up. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Sounds great.
And Harry, if there are any follow-up questions, oh, you're most welcome. It's my pleasure. If there are any follow-up questions or if you need any assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out. I certainly want to make sure that you're off to a solid start and that you feel comfortable.
Thank you so much, Anna. I really appreciate that.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. I appreciate your time. I know it's a very busy time of the year, so certainly I appreciate that you've carved out the time to walk through the application. As I said, if there's anything you need, please let me know.
Thanks, Anna. I really appreciate your time, and thank you, everyone else on the call.
Thanks, everybody.